Hello, my name is Grace Hasson, and my thesis is a poetry collection that portrays an echoist's path towards growth, self-love, and healing. I tell this story through the use of poetic forms, body and nature-related imagery, and contrasts between hot and cold. You may be wondering, what is an echoist? An echoist, as I learned from reading Craig Malkin's Rethinking Narcissism, is a person who gives up their own needs and sense of self in order to help others. Think of them as the people on the opposite end of the spectrum from narcissists. My thesis attempts to recognize and offer hope for the people who become mere echoes of others. That is why I titled my thesis The Echoist. I wanted to try to shine a spotlight on those afraid of the spotlight. Other influences on my poetry include Mary Oliver and the holiness and growth she writes with, the strength of Audre Lorde's poetry, and the honesty of Tara Campbell, Paige Lewis, and Ashley Frangipane. Dr. Malkin wrote in his book, Echoists, especially very nurturing, empathic ones, are drawn to narcissists. I wrote a poem to try to capture this. I wanted to portray echoism and its entanglement with narcissism through the Greek myth of Narcissus. I titled the poem Narcissus and the Girl, and chose not to name the character Echo in the title to try to emphasize her lack of self-worth. I will now share that poem with you. Narcissus and the Girl. For all my life, I've known the story of Narcissus without knowing about Echo, who loved him. But now that I know about her, I want to love her. She prayed for love with skeletal hands, believed hollow love was the only love, that it was as beautiful as the gentle sloping nose of an angel. There was nothing she could do except love him. She was like leaves that spent too long in the sun, knelt at his side and begged him to look at her, to see her. She died in agony, forgotten. Why I'm writing this. I'm trying to make peace with, but also make progress despite my own echoism. That is why many of the poems attempt to capture my own experiences in order to connect with those who can relate. One of the poems I wrote about my own personal experience is You Be the Ivy, I'll Be the Tree, about the consequences of being an echoist. I will now read that poem. You be the ivy, I'll be the tree. After his mother died, we bought coffee he didn't drink. He said it tasted like cigarettes. I thought I loved him. I loved that he needed me. He once told me we were one person. Sometimes you're the heart and I'm the brain, and sometimes it's the other way around. The ivy says we are one to the tree, only to strangle it. Over the course of years, I've read about ivy covering trees like a layer of green skin. The weight of the ivy becomes so unbearable, the tree topples like a domino. In writing poems like this, I become more aware of how echoism harms the echoist. That is why I try to remind myself that I do not need to be one. One of the poems that reminds me of this is Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. I use it as a kind of mantra to combat my echoism. She writes, You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. This is a reminder to be kind to myself, and it has helped me in healing and in writing my thesis. The secret to escaping echoism is through self-love. That's what I wanted to capture in this collection. But the more honest I was while writing these poems, the more I realized I hadn't completely healed, and that recovering from echoism is actually a lifelong journey. I wanted to show the reality that echoism is not a switch that can be shut off, but also that self-love can be found. I wrote the poem, I'm Afraid to Say I Love You, about how self-love is fragile, how it is even more precious for those of us who find it to be so fragile. I wanted to write what self-love feels like for an echoist. Here's that poem. I'm afraid to say I love you, to myself. I don't know how long this will last. I hold this love like snowflakes on gloveless hands. Self-love is not easy to find for echoists. I noticed that there are so many books on narcissism, but just about none on echoism. It's as if echoists are dismissed in literature, just as they are in life. I'd like to share one more poem, and it's the shortest in the collection. It's actually only one line. It started as having several stanzas, but with help, I realized I said everything I needed to in the title and first line. The poem is about how healing is not easy, and not even pretty, and that's sometimes how you know you're putting in the real work. Here's my poem titled, The Art of Letting Go. The art of letting go. Calling it art is generous. Letting go of one's egoism is not lighting candles and eating chocolate. It's not the commercialized self-care sold in stores. It's learning to meditate even when your head is spinning, or scheduling a therapy session when you feel like your whole world might come down upon you. I'm working on letting go of my own egoism a little bit every day. Unfortunately, healing is not linear. We take steps forward and steps back along the way, but what matters is the progress and growth that comes from healing inner wounds. I hope to share my poetry so that people can recognize the echoist in their life, or their own echoism, and I hope to share the holiness that is an echoist journey towards self-love. Thank you.